the false assumption, I think it's so easy to believe, is that if we take a day off, things will fall apart, right?
Right.
Like the world will stop. But God's like, listen, guys, if I rested for a day and all of creation was made and
It
keeps
kept
going,
going.
like I think you're allowed
Right.
to rest for a day. And so I think we rest and remember all God has done in creating and rescuing us. It also, and that brings a sense of rest, because it's like,
Right.
oh, wait. I just worked. I grinded out. Now let me just remember for a second. Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Like, I'm not the one that's ultimately doing the work. I'm not
Right.
the one that saved myself. I'm not the one, like, God is the one who, with an outstretched arm, delivered me. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this episode of the Clover Hill Family Ministry Podcast. I am Charles.
I am Shea.
Shea, it's great to be back with you filming an episode as we're in mid-June. Summer is here.
Finally.
The weather is awesome. The pools are open.
Splashing.
Everyone's graduating. I mean, this is the time
Wild.
to be going to grad parties and all of that. Congrats to any parents who your kid just graduated.
Yes,
I mean,
congrats.
I know we got young kids. You do, I do. Like, it's
Right.
crazy to think that that's going to be reality one day.
Right.
You know?
And probably sooner than later.
Yeah.
And we might be on these same couches in 13 years boohooing.
Like,
Can we
where'd the
believe?
time go? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But so this is our second episode this month. And so if you could just remind our listeners, what did we talk about first episode of June, how that kind of translates into our talk for today?
Right. It was about filling your, not just bucket list, but your summer bucket, love bucket. Of
love bucket. That's cool.
Filling your family's intentionality and your time together,
Right.
creating some really core memories that don't have to break the bank,
Right.
about being spiritually focused on leading yourself, your spouse, your children in this growth in this summer. And then also about being intentional about life skills and friendships, but not just adding a ton of stuff to the calendar
Yeah.
because we're so busy during the school year, but really about a reset, summer reset, and really pouring into your kids
Yeah.
this summer. So when things get exhausting and you're
Which they
pulling
will.
from the reserves
Yeah.
come October, November.
Yeah,
This is where you're pulling from. So really about
that's cool.
filling that bucket
Yeah,
so you can pour
filling
out
that
later.
proverbial bucket so you're full, making memories,
Right.
getting charged up with the family so that you can then, I like how you said that, understanding what this isn't a thin season, so really load up, right? Like
Yes.
eat it up,
Right.
get ready, and then allow yourself to know you have this in the bank.
This
for
is the
when-
reserves.
When things get thin,
Right.
things get light.
Right.
That's cool. And so so go listen if you haven't, because it does kind of translate into today. Because today we're talking about Sabbath
And rest.
and rest. And specifically, again, we want to really open up and give kind of a little bit of an understanding of what Sabbath is, what it means, but hopefully more practically what this has to do with us in 2024 and our summers and our families, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I am passionate about Sabbath and
Good,
rest.
good.
And it's really it started for me a couple of years ago
Okay.
when it was like it was my resolution. Like, I am going to establish a Sabbath and see how it goes. And it's gold.
Yeah.
We have
So you kept with it.
I kept with it.
That's
And it was
really
like the
cool.
resolution that changed
Yeah.
my day, my week, my year. So
Yeah,
I love
that's
this
cool.
topic.
And most people in the church understand Sabbath is in the 10 Commandments,
Right.
But when you talk about, and everyone has different views of like, again, OT law, what that means for us today, fulfilled in Christ, all that. We don't have to talk about that. But it is always interesting. I think it's interesting how people always seem to remember like, no other gods before him, and honor your mother and father, and don't steal, don't covet. But no one ever really seems to realize that Sabbath was right in there
It's the
with these
right.
the 10 Commandments. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, it's definitely, if we were to say which was the forgotten law or principle,
Right.
I would probably put my money on Sabbath.
Sure.
being the one that
Right.
I
It's
think
easy
a
to
lot of
remember
people-
don't kill. But
Very
but
easy,
you know what? If you're not rested, you might want to kill.
Come on,
So-
that'll preach.
So
That's it.
actually, Charles,
Yeah.
did you know the 10 Commandments, the first 3 are really focused in on
Us
your
and God,
relationship
right?
with God.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Sabbath is the 4th commandment. Then the rest of them have to do with our relationship with others.
People, okay. So
So,
Sabbath is kind of that middle
It's
piece.
kind of the middle piece.
That's
and I
sweet.
wonder and I think our God is a very
Yeah,
detailed and
Come on,
creative God.
Let's hear it. Let it out. What is it?
I think that is an intentional point, smack dab in the middle, that we are focused on God. We can establish a Sabbath before we really focus on others, because I think there's something about rest and honoring God on that day that recharges us to help us in our relationships.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really
That's pretty
cool position in the Ten Commandments.
Well, and we know, like, we know this. God wouldn't just tell his people to do this if there wasn't some great significance behind it.
There is a significant reason.
He wouldn't just be saying Sabbath because he was like, oh, I only have 9 commandments. I better give another.
Let's just throw one in.
Yeah.
This is for a reason and
definitely
a purpose.
Number 4, for a reason.
Number
Look
4.
At that.
And I think in the order for a reason.
Yeah. And so I think just kind of just talk through, we'll talk through some scripture a little bit, guys. And of course, Sabbath, the first thing we see of Sabbath is in creation story. I want to read Genesis 2 really fast, verses 2 and 3. It says, by the 7th day, God completed his work which he had done, and then he rested on the 7th day from all the work which he had done. Then God blessed the 7th day. He sanctified the 7th day, because on it he rested from all of his work which God created and made. And so Sabbath isn't explicitly stated here, but the whole concept of Sabbath is clear as day.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
And that God models it. So if God's modeling it, maybe we should take a play out of his playbook.
I think he knows what he's doing.
And I think we need to do something that he's doing.
Yeah, and I think this really can blow your mind too, because if we believe God is omnipotent and all-powerful and can do anything, and like, why would he doesn't need a day off? You know what I'm saying? So it really becomes this kind of mind-blowing idea that God himself practiced this and then instituted it for his people. And so again, it's in the 10 Commandments. I want to read what God says about it in Exodus 20. So he said, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female servants, your animals, any foreigner residing in your towns. And then listen to this. And then God references creation in Exodus 20, verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that's in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And so here, when God's giving the 10 Commandments and he gives the Sabbath, it's interesting that the reasoning for that, he says, is I rested. When I made the heavens and the earth, I rested from my work. Therefore, you should rest. And if we fast forward to Deuteronomy 5, Moses re-gives the 10 Commandments, but there's a difference. It's really interesting. So Moses says something very similar. Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15. Observe the Sabbath, keep it holy. Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you labor, do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day. Again, same kind of concept. Don't work, you don't work, your servants don't work, the foreigner doesn't work, all that stuff. But then he ends it with, instead of saying God rested in creation, he alludes back to the Exodus story. And he says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. And I think this is fascinating.
Agreed.
That God rested, he gives the Sabbath law, and then he has 2 distinct, I don't know if emphasis is the right word, but he gives 2 different reasonings here, right? He says rest, 1A, rest because when I created the world, I rested. Yeah, I need you to rest. And then 1B is rest because look back and remember you were slaves. I delivered you. Therefore, rest. What do you think that's about?
There is the connection, right? We model, or God modeled what we're supposed to do. So we already have a clear picture. We follow him. We do what he does. But 2, this idea of you worked, you were a slave. There were no rest days. There were no, you were a slave to your work. And as a modern day message, you are not a slave to your work. Like you are created to rest and recharge and recreate on an intended day to worship God, to spend with your family. And if you're constantly working, and I want to get into that and how that practically looks later, but if you're constantly busy and working and you're not recharging, you are forgetting this fact that we were once slaves. We were once in bondage. And before we became Christians, we maybe had that no Sabbath, we didn't have a Sabbath. So we take a moment on our day of rest on our Sabbath to remember I don't have to work. I don't have to earn. I don't have to produce or create and do. It is about stopping, recharging, remembering God is holy.
Yeah.
He modeled this.
And that's so good. Yeah. Because the weight that I think, because in these two things, God's calling attention, right? He's saying, hey, realize I rested from my work. And I think with that speaks volumes to is the fact that if I think we don't, the false assumption, I think it's so easy to believe, is that if we take a day off, things will fall apart, right?
Right.
Like the world will stop. But God's like, listen, guys, if I rested for a day and all of creation was made and
It
keeps
kept
going, like I think you're allowed to rest for a day. And so I think calling attention to that is so big. And like you mentioned with the Exodus, because what God says specifically, he says, with my mighty hand and outstretched arm, I rescued you. And so just like what you said, they were slaves to their work. It also is emphasizing the fact that you didn't save yourself from Egypt. Like I saved yourself. And so it even speaks to the fact how Sabbath carries this implication but when we rest and remember all God has done in creating and rescuing us, it also, and that brings a sense of rest, because it's like, oh, wait, I just worked, I grinded out, now let me just remember for a second. Oh yeah, like, I'm not the one that's ultimately doing the work. I'm not the one that saved myself. I'm not the one, like God is the one who with an outstretched arm delivered me. And that just brings such like a, and I think it's supposed to, a peace and a lightness of like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm not God. Cool, I can take it easy, you know, God's did it before, he's gonna do it again. And so many implications that come from this. It's so rich and healthy.
With all of the scripture that you mentioned, a lot of it from Exodus and Deuteronomy. So we're in the season where we're talking about God is telling his people how to be his people. Right? He's called them
which means
out,
how to image him, right? How to be like God.
How to be like him, and how to have a successful life and nation, and as God's, fingerprint, thumb people, like you are his. And I think it's so fascinating how he always reminds his people two things: do not have any other gods before me, and to keep Sabbath. And I think it's closely related, because if they don't have Sabbath, what are they reaching for? Idols. 100%. They're reaching for the things that are easy to grab. And I think when we look at our lives, I do this. When I am tired and overly exhausted and I have not properly rested, I go for my idols.
100%.
I go for the chips.
You go for the quick
I go for the next episode, Netflix real quick. I go for the things that make me feel good
in the
moment, because I'm reaching for the things that are easy, versus me being intentional about a day of rest and setting myself up for that success, so I don't have the other idols in my life. And I think it was so intentional. The reason God put those two things always to his people, don't have any other gods before me, keep a Sabbath, is because he knows when we don't keep Sabbath, we reach for other gods.
And it messes up keeping him as our only God, and it messes up our loyalty to him.
Which is the first commandment.
That's
the number one.
Sabbath
and from
is,
Jesus, right? Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, body, strength, and then love others as yourself. That's still number one, even in the New Testament.
It is, yeah. And so, again, we're just trying to paint the picture, give you a little bit of biblical theology of Sabbath, significance, how it does still translate into today. And Jesus, last scripture I want to share in Mark 2, because oftentimes, people will say, again, fulfillment of the Old Testament law doesn't matter anymore. It's different, all those things. And again, we don't need to get into those conversations. I would love to if you want to, but we don't have to. But Jesus says something that, again, really just sheds so much light to what the Sabbath really is about, and even how it does carry into today. Because people were questioning the Sabbath, teachers of the law were coming at him because his disciples were, I think they were picking grain and they were getting so mad. And Jesus said this baller line in Mark 2:27. He said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Which the whole point there is showing that we weren't made to feel like this legalistic ritual of like practice the Sabbath, do it for the Sabbath's sake. But Jesus is trying to say, like, I instituted this day from the beginning for you.
For
like,
you.
This is something that's for your good.
Right.
And if God instituted something into the fabric of the cosmos and creation for our good, why in the world would we not want to take hold of that?
I know.
It's probably going to be for our benefit, right?
Right.
Definitely it would be. And so I don't want to spend too much time. I want us to get to the practical stuff, but just for those of you who maybe don't know, Sabbath is one of those things that I would say belongs in the category of spiritual disciplines, spiritual rhythms, these unforced rhythms of grace that we practice for our good. So we're talking about from Bible reading to prayer to fasting to Sabbath.
Right.
These things that we regularly, that's why it's a discipline and a rhythm, regularly practice that help put our mind on the right thing, that help us keep no other gods before God, right? To help us in our walk with Him and in our growth with Him. And an easy way to look at it is, I think this is always the best picture. Shea, you got 3 kids?
3.
3 kids, okay. And so let's say one of the kids lives in their room for their whole life. Okay, so you have 3 kids, 2 of them with you all the time. One of them lives in their room. Are they all status-wise equally your kid?
Sure.
Like the one that lives in the room isn't any lesser than.
Right, still my child.
Still your child. But 18 years down the road, who's going to be closer to you?
So good.
Right. Who's going to be closer?
Yeah, the 2 that are
But is the one that lived in the room still just as much your child?
Yes.
Just as much your child. But they missed out on the benefits of being a kid, right? They didn't grow. And that's what spiritual disciplines really, I think it's a great picture that show us. Something like Sabbath, it's putting you in the path where Jesus is. And it's placing you intentionally into the benefits of salvation. Like it's only going to help you grow. And so that's why we want to do it. And so now as we get into more practical stuff about Sabbath, again, there's a whole lot of different ideas, principles. People are like on Sunday. People are like, no, the Jewish nation did Friday night to Saturday night. Like what do you think about all?
Yeah, actually, I had a study abroad in Israel. And man, we would go hard traveling all of Israel, and we would have these long trips.
You were there for like a semester?
Yeah, it was a semester.
Cool. That's awesome.
My last semester of college. Most incredible place I've ever been. And it was, we learned so much. We were seeing all of these sites, and we were going hard. And we're still doing schoolwork, or reports, and getting together. But on Friday nights, a hush would fall over the city. Yeah. And you felt it in the atmosphere that something shifted.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we would go to the market beforehand, and it was just like this busy, like energetic feeling of like everybody's getting their stuff together, they're prepping. And then as soon as the sun set, it's truly a holy moment of rest. And as a student who we were traveling all the time, going from site to site, it was like something that we started to crave every Friday night and to Saturday, knowing like we're not doing schoolwork, we're just resting, we're eating our snacks from the market. It was holy. And I came back from that thinking like, there's something about Sabbath.
To it, yeah.
So, but what's interesting? I had kind of a recent conviction about Sabbath. You said in the very beginning, when we talked about Genesis, God worked for 6 days and rested on the 7th. I don't know about you, Charles, but sometimes I like to start my weekends on Thursday nights. And I just kind of get into the weekend zone. Friday, it's a wash. Saturday, I'm like, I'm tired. We're sleeping in. I might skip my workout or not. Or, we ordered pizza on Friday night because I'm tired of cooking. I've let the laundry pile up. And so now Sunday, I'm like, oh, it's my rest day. I'm not doing any of that. Not that I just did the past 2 days.
That's funny.
And then Monday comes.
And it hits you.
I get the Sunday scaries. It's because I have left laundry to do.
Just sitting there.
Sit for like 3 days. And now I have a giant pile waiting for me on Monday. I haven't meal prepped a single thing. We've eaten out all weekend. And now I feel gross about like all the food we ate. So I had a conviction moment recently. And I just felt like God said, like, I worked 6 days. Why aren't you?
Yeah.
And not saying like I have to like go like hard for 6 days, but I think it was more about how can I be more intentional like, would it harm me on Saturday to do a load of laundry? Like, keep it low. Like, would it harm me to go ahead and double the eggs that I'm scrambling or the pancakes that I'm making? And so for Monday, I have some extra reserves that I've been more intentional. I've worked. And so for me, one of the practical things of Sabbath is actually working more, being more intentional about my Sunday off. And for me, Sabbath is on a Sunday because it's how our family flows. People in clergy and people who are working on Sundays, that's not necessarily their case. But for me, it was, how can I be focused in on Friday and Saturday to actually work more, to rest harder, and to be like thoughtful on what my rest day should feel like, and setting myself up for success on Monday where I'm not looking at Mount Everest of laundry.
Yeah. No, that's so good. And I do think a lot of us, we misunderstand and, you know, just the value of work itself, and how I think we can sometimes maybe even idolize rest. You know, and thinking like if we just rest hard or just totally veg out, or like what you said, this big, like, it kind of becomes this like 3-day period that then we come out of it, and it probably did us more harm than good.
Right.
You know, and so again, I do think, and we're not trying to be legalistic by saying 6 and 1, 6 and 1.
Right.
But I do think there's meant to be a rhythm to it that that's for a purpose.
It's
for our good. And I found that same thing to where we've kind of, you know, our family, because like what you said, just being in ministry, our natural Sabbath rhythm is Friday 5 o'clock to Saturday 5 o'clock, and like and I do a hard stop. I silent all my notifications and those kind of things. We go into it, and again, we want to get into it's probably going to be mixing in because I want to get into practicals. I think it's natural to get into some of them as we talk about it, but giving ourselves that day to where we know like we're not going to be doing. We're only going to be doing things that are restful for us, things that are going to fill us, things that are going to fill our bucket, fill our tank, create memories, just fun, things like that. And then we know, again, coming out of that, it's back into the grind. But what's important is what you don't want to do, because this is also dangerous, is you don't want to work for rest. Because that's the other downside of this, is if you get to like Sabbath, I think part of what it says in Hebrews, remember, that we kind of enter his rest. He references Psalm, I think it's 95, and says, don't harden your hearts or else you're not going to enter my rest. But he alludes to people who have entered the rest, and it kind of breaks this Sabbath bubble of like, wait a second, we're actually living in Sabbath. We have a taste of it. And I think it's supposed to show us that while there still is this Sabbath for us right now, as God's people, we're also supposed to be people that are working from rest.
Right.
Because we know God, his character, he's holding it all together. He's the one moving history forward. He's the one saving souls. And so we don't want to get like too hyper-focused on the Sabbath itself, but it kind of becomes a larger picture of both, one, instituting a Sabbath for your family, having that day of rest together and knowing what that means for you and your family. But then also, how do we make sure we're working from rest?
Right.
What are the little rhythms I can institute every single day? What are the things I can do? Because nobody wants to be the typical American who is working for the weekend.
No.
You know, like it's just not having that dread coming out. Like that's just not the way, that's not the way God designed it to be. He wants us to enjoy our work and to find, again, work from rest, not for rest. And so that's that probably be its own episode. And
that is a whole episode. That's good.
There's a lot to that, but I've just found I've learned a lot about that personally just through time with the Lord and reflection about what that means. But so just more practical, looking at Sabbath. Or were you going to say something?
Well, you said in how that looks for your family.
Yeah.
And I think we had mentioned this on another time, but it might be different from you versus what your wife Alyssa Sabbath and what it fills her bucket for rest.
Yeah.
So I'm just practically, what do you guys do for your Sabbath?
Yeah, and I think that's a really great question. And before I even answer that, I do think I would very much argue that it's going to be impossible to practice Sabbath if this isn't a whole family thing. I think it's very difficult if one spouse isn't committed to it, or if you have. And again, I know like if there's older kids, it could be different, but for it to really be successful, I do believe this has to be a whole family buy-in commitment
I
thing,
agree.
that we're going to do this together.
Right.
We're going to be a little bit different than other people, but we're going to practice this, and
Right.
we're going to honor it together. And so I think that's kind of the first part. Is it's hard to do this if we're not all bought in together. But then beyond that, you'll hear a lot of people say how, again, this is about what's restful for me. And so I'm sure a lot of spouses are that way, but I'm wired differently than my wife. My job as a pastor my job is very emotionally and spiritually and mentally draining.
Sure.
My job isn't physically taxing at all. My job is it's a lot of me pouring myself out, hearing loads, like taking on it's a lot of that kind of
Right.
stuff,
Right.
And so for me, my Sabbath is like, I don't want to expend any kind of like emotional, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
There's nothing there.
Right.
I don't want to give it. But like, I love helping my wife doing like yard projects. So like we're still working, if you will, you know what I mean? Like I have no problem. I'll do laundry on the Sabbath. I'll do the dishes on the Sabbath. I'll do this kind of stuff because, again, for me, being able to know my brain is off and I'm just doing stuff, it's actually restful.
Right.
And it's actually good for me. Whereas my wife, she's staying at home with the kids, and so hers is a little bit more of the physical and emotionally draining in a different way. And so it really becomes I love the term Sabbath menu, because you're able to, and I would encourage you guys as a family to sit down and really just ask each other that simple question.
That's good.
What is restful for you? What's restful for you? Is it like, and if you have a more physical job, it might be more restful to actually do something that's a little bit more mental taxing,
And spiritually
Yeah, exactly.
and
Whatever that
emotionally
could be for you. But I think asking the question of what's restful for you, and then laying it out on the table, and then saying, cool, so now I think there's certain things that you should have every week, but then there needs to be some variance. And so, for example, sometimes I remember a month and a half ago, my wife really wanted to get brunch with a couple friend.
Yeah.
For me, I'm usually actually not wanting to be with people, even though I'm an extrovert. I love people, but again, my job is people.
You just need to recharge.
And so I kind of like to not. But for her, like that's really what. Again, she's just around kids all day, and so it's the opposite. Being around people for her is actually having an adult conversation.
Right.
And I'm like, all I do is have adult conversation.
Right.
I mean, like I don't want to talk to adults or kids.
Done talking.
Yeah, and so, but for me, it was like knowing that's restful for her. We went and we did it. Right. And I enjoyed it because ultimately I just want to be with my wife
and serve her.
And so it's like, it's like if we're doing that, no big deal. Wrestle for me, and then we kind of give and take a little bit in that. And so I think having those conversations, what's restful for you, and knowing too, knowing just as important as you finding rest is your spouse and kids finding rest. So how can we
work together,
and the fun little things too, like you mentioned ordering pizza. Like we totally. That's why I love it too, is like health wise, I follow my diet all week.
And there's a day.
But Friday night, all day Saturday, I'll veg out,
Sure.
I'll do whatever. And the kids love it because it's more, it's just more fun. And we do that together, enjoying each other's company.
And the food.
Yeah, and just resting,
Sure.
And so what about for you? Kind of how have you guys figured that out, and how does that implement?
I mean, it's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
But so my husband is constantly at a computer and sitting in an office and managing. So his is actually physical work.
Right.
So that actually helps him. He does not mind going to cut the grass and getting that energy. He loves to go to the gym, even on that rest day, because it's recreation.
Yeah.
And the word, I remember my college professor, shout out Dr. Hackett from Southeastern, he would say recreation has the root word of recreate.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you going to recreate in your recreation that gives life to your Sabbath? And I mean, I love to spend time with my kids and my family, but there is a point in my Sabbath where I'm like, I need everybody in their own rooms during nap time, and I need to go and lay on the couch and rest. I need that. I'm not doing the laundry that day. I'm not putting the dishes up that day. And that's just because that's my everyday, all day. And usually that's the day I'm like, babe, we gotta order Chipotle in, because I'm toast. I'm done. I'm done. And that's why I keep the reserves of that. What do I need to fill my cup to be ready to go on Monday. So Michael's really great. Like Sundays, he's unloading the dishwasher and usually making breakfast for everyone.
That's
so
awesome.
that's how we're really working together as a couple. And he's really totally fine when I'm like, I can't cook.
Yeah.
Like even last night, and obviously this is not Sabbath last night, but I'm like, I have no energy for food. So good luck anything you find in the fridge. And I made a smoothie and pop popcorn, but it's kind of like what you said, like a little Sabbath each day sometimes is what you need.
Yeah, you do. And we're supposed to live that way. And again, it
have to live.
reminds us all the time, God's in control.
God is
He's
in
got
control.
this thing. But I love that. And hearing you say that, most Sabbaths, I'll end up cooking almost all the meals because I enjoy it. You know, it's fun for me.
that.
I love to grill. I love to smoke. I love to do my things and stuff, things like that. And of course, Alyssa loves it. She gets a break. And so like finding those things and knowing, again, what's going to be actually restful for you and all those different, it takes time and energy, intentionality, studying yourself. But one thing I want to heed warning wise though is it's easy to also then fall in the trap of having too much of a good thing.
Sure.
You know, classic example is, and it can be restful to watch a Netflix show or something like that. Really can be restful.
Right.
But watching that for a whole day
And
is
then
probably too much of a good thing.
Right. Having a healthy boundary.
Yeah, and you need to know yourself to where like there still needs to be some sort of restrictions and caps on some stuff.
Absolutely.
You know, to where
we are
like,
called to live in
for example, you mentioned nap time. Just lay on the couch, have your Shea time, just chill.
I need 1 hour.
If you did that for the whole day,
Right.
it actually could be more harmful than restful.
I don't sleep well that night because I've just been doing nothing.
Yeah.
Then my Monday starts and I'm toast.
Yeah.
So you're totally right. I think God ultimately, just if anybody's getting anything out of this episode, God's not looking at law, he's looking at heart. And how the question always comes back to, how are we honoring God? How are we loving him? How are we spending time in his presence and spending time with our family? And what are we pouring in? So for the reserves on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, what are we
I think that's so good because you don't want to fall into the trap of also thinking, let's say like you're like me, right? And your Sabbath is that Friday to Saturday. And let's say something happens and you have to, something at work happens that you have to go in. Life happens. This happens. This happens. You don't want to fall into the trap that God's up there like, I'm about to smite the heck out of you. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not, remember, because it's for us. It's his gift for us. And so it's just knowing there's times when those things will happen. And so it's just cool. So how then can we make sure rest is still taking place and just being intentional about it and being smart about it.
Like you said, like life happens. Like that last Sunday, my daughter had her 2:00 dance recital and you know, it is what it is. Yeah. Now I will say this about when you are planning your family and your family's activities for the next school year, hey, if things are constantly falling on your Sabbath, that might need to be a conversation that needs to happen. And maybe we'll get into that before we get to the school year. Yeah. But guard your family. Yeah. Like you as the parent.
You have to fight for it. Yeah.
You have to fight for God to be first. Yeah. And to fight to be together as a family and be the main influence in your children's life. Yeah. So fight for that. And I think practicing Sabbath and making it a holy day in your family starts that rhythm in your family that this is important. God did it. We're doing it too.
Yeah, I love that. And so I just want to encourage you guys, ask your family, what is restful for you? And be okay. I've heard so many families who they're so creative and where it's like families with older teens and things like that, they kind of have like, you know, it could be 8 to 12 or whatever is like, it's only us. And so what's restful for us to do together?
Love that.
And then like 12 to 6 or whatever is like, everyone do your thing. If rest for you is going and hanging out with go do your thing. I'm going to do my thing. That. And I think it's so cool too. Again, there's this balance of keeping it holy doesn't mean like firm grasp, legalistic. It has to be this way. But it does mean honoring it and treating it like a different day. That's the whole point, setting it apart. Holy. Yeah, and treating it special like it should be. There's just so much benefit. And once you start doing it, I mean, you just fall in love with it.
It changed.
It's like I can't do life without it.
I did my resolution and it changed everything. Yeah. Give it a try.
Yeah, you really can't do life without it. So go ahead and ask your families that, guys. And even let us know. I'd love to hear what kind of things you guys come up with what rest means for you, how you can practice it, how you can implement it, and how you can get this rhythm going. And the more you're able to get this stuff figured out now in the summer, the better it'll set you up for the fall.
Keep it as a boundary.
Yeah.
Keep it as a practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Sabbath it up.
Sabbath.
Thanks for listening, guys.